All right, Dr. Dan, I am very excited to have this conversation because I would say there's nothing else that I talk about more than sleep. And because I consider it like it's the top pillar right behind getting good nutrition, because the simple fact is if you don't eat, you don't survive. But I think people shortchange sleep, and especially as we get older, how important it is. And I'm excited for us to talk today because this is your wheelhouse, this is your profession, this is your research, this is your baby. So before we get started, tell my people, like, how did you get into sleep research and this whole arena?
Yes, and thanks so much for having me on your show, Dr. Betty. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've been doing this since I was a sleep-deprived college student. I got into taking my first neuroscience of sleep class in college after really suffering from some personal issues with poor sleep quality. I probably had something called delayed sleep phase syndrome when I was in high school. It's actually very, very common because of the intense scheduling that is really misaligned with teenagers' circadian rhythms. Teenagers actually naturally become night owls from an evolutionary biology perspective to maybe push away from their parents a little bit. Yet, for whatever reason, I was waking up, the school made you wake up I remember being up at like 5:30 waiting for my bus stop in like pitch dark at like 6 o'clock and stuff. And I was sort of a kid that would, not a bad kid, but I'd go out late on the weekends and stuff like this and get into a little trouble. And so it just really threw off my circadian. That followed me into college where I was working in a restaurant, working late. And so I had a really bad case of insomnia, actually. And so I was always an inventor and an innovator, and in college I made one of the first iPhone apps to help with sleep. It was called Proactive Sleep at that time in 2010. And then I was like, I need to learn more about this. So I ended up getting a PhD studying sleep and fatigue, actually trying to prevent Air Force pilots. I was working for for Naval Research Labs and the Air Force Research Labs, trying to prevent accidents by making models of when they would get tired so they don't like crash their planes and stuff like this. And so that's what I got a PhD in applied psychology. And also, during this time I've started the quantified self movement in Washington, D.C. I was the organizer. So I was very exposed to lots of people who were obsessed with their data and starting to use wearables to make more sense of their data. And so I really come from that personal science background, which I know you and I are so passionate about. And I've seen people track every 5 minutes of their life. I've seen like lots of crazy, maybe borderline obsessive compulsive things. And I ended up getting a bunch of grants from the NIH to try to make sleep deeper using sounds. And in this whole process, I've tried almost every wearable and device. I actually identified my own case of sleep apnea relatively recently that we can delve into. But that's it. I'm passionate by this idea that sleep, unlike diet and exercise, you're not conscious. And so that has some pros and cons. There's some trade-offs for that. But the cool thing about sleep that I'm really passionate about is you can do certain things and significantly improve your sleep quality without doing anything at night. One of the big ones is like dark blackout blinds and stuff like this, which is one of the, if you can improve your sleep just like 1%, it pays off in dividends. So that sort of idea I'm very passionate about. Like, how do we make everyone's sleep 1% better? And it might be very different for you as someone else. So that's my story.
Yeah, I had, it's so true. When you were talking about, being a teenager, same thing. I remember, getting up, getting in my car, driving to school, and basically sleeping through the first 3 periods every single day. I couldn't stay awake, and it was always math class. No matter what I did, no matter how I tried to rearrange it, math class was my first class. So I just basically sat next to the smart kid. I was like, what did we study today, man? Because I don't know. And it's the truth, but I had trouble with sleep my entire life until I had airway, fixed, right? And so let's talk a little bit about the different problems with sleep. So you talked about kind of delayed onset and insomnia, but, I think a lot of people think, oh, if I don't snore like a freight train and stop breathing with significant sleep apnea, I probably don't really have an issue, which is completely inaccurate. Tell my listeners a little bit about the different forms of things that they could be seeing.
Yeah, so I can give you like the laundry list right now for the symptoms of sleep apnea, and also, just letting the listeners know that you might be sort of sub-threshold sleep apnea, but still could do more to optimize your breathing at night. And I think literally around 1 in 2 people could improve their breathing at night, and that would have a major impact on improving their sleep quality. I would say, I've coached thousands of people on their sleep, and a lot of people want to improve their deep sleep. I get it all the time. Deep sleep is good, REM is good. There's a sort of a misnomer because of how people say the stages, but light sleep is also good. So you got to get as much. Generally, it's if your body can sleep, you should sleep, and you should get at least 7 to 9 hours a night. And you want to get more deep in REM though, and probably poor breathing at night is, I would argue, is the main reason why people might not be getting enough deep or REM sleep. So just a laundry list of possible symptoms of sleep apnea. You do not have to be that overweight person that is sort of the archetype that people have in their mind of having sleep apnea. So, and especially for women, as I think you're, intimately familiar with, there's a funny, there's the Avenue Q play. It's like everyone's a little bit racist. It's like one of the lines from it. And that's actually true for the sensors a little bit. Actually, like the darker hued skin, it's not as accurate for the sensors. But also the sleep apnea diagnostics are just a little bit sexist, as you're familiar with. A lot of men usually made these measures, and men are actually more likely to have the intense shift in blood oxygenation, whereas women could be suffering from this, but it's more of like an upper airway resistance problem. And the threshold is basically your blood oxygenation drops by 3% within a certain interval of time. That's called a hypopnea. That's how we diagnose sleep apnea. There's probably a huge underdiagnosed population of women that are in perfectly good shape, but because of the anatomy of their airway, and it's like a smaller physique oftentimes, they have these dips of around 2%, which is technically not a hypopnea, but it's upper airway resistance. And so possible symptoms include snoring, being overweight is a factor, grinding your teeth, acid reflux, which was something that I really struggled with and didn't know why until I started treating my sleep apnea. Oh my gosh, there's fatigue during the day after getting what would be considered a healthy amount of sleep, 7 to 9 hours. Bruxism, or grinding your teeth. So dentists can often see this, and that's a whole nother thing. And there's probably something else that I'm missing, but those are the big ones off the top of my mind.
Yeah, because you kind of alluded to it, and I would say most of my listeners know this because I went through palate expansion and braces as an adult solely for airway. And literally it was like night and day being able to actually sleep. And my husband was like, I never hear you snore. There's no snoring. I can't hear it. But there was definitely upper airway resistance. So we talked a little bit about the hypoapneas. What about the arousals? The sort of arousal to the central nervous system, and particularly the frontal lobe and amygdala, because I think that gets underrepresented, particularly in women.
Yeah, I mean, so this is and this is why it's related to insomnia in some ways. Both insomnia and sleep apnea have the effect of being hyper-aroused. It's sort of for different reasons. One is more you're literally not breathing. The definition for sleep apnea is on average more than 5 times in an hour you are not breathing optimally. That would be called a mild case of sleep apnea. Moderate is you're doing that 15 to 30 times an hour. Imagine that, not breathing 15 to 30 times an hour. Severe cases, they're not breathing properly more than 30 times an hour. And there's instances where it's 100 times an hour. It's a really serious case. So that puts a lot of stress on the cardiovascular system. Some estimates show that it takes about 5 years off of your life when it's untreated. And that results in your blood pressure going up and you being essentially hyper-aroused. Similarly, when you have insomnia, you're hyper-aroused, but it's more of a cognitive thing, more of a behavioral thing. But since both of these disorders go together, there's actually a new term in the literature called Chomisa, which is something I've been passionate about solving for recently as a sleep scientist. And it's called comorbid obstructive sleep apnea and insomnia. That's what Chomisa stands for. Because about 50% of people who have sleep apnea also have insomnia, probably because of this hyperarousal relationship.
Yeah, well, and you get a surge of cortisol when you have any of those events. You're going to get, your body's going to result with adrenaline and cortisol, which is again going to cause hyperarousal because there's a part of your body that's basically the brain goes, I'm going to get attacked. So it's of course it's going to be terrible. So
it feeds into each other, right? So
yeah.
And also it's stressful to not breathe at night. It can result in more nightmares and stuff like this because your body is reacting to a physiologically stressful thing. So they definitely feed into each other, where I think it's more like the sleep apnea can often cause more insomnia.
Yeah, I find a lot of my patients over the last 20 years have said, they may have where they get aroused and stay awake. There's a lot of waking up at 1, and we're going to talk about some of those reasons why women particularly experience that, like the 1 to 3 a.m. witching hour. But I think this is also under-recognized is I hear the story that they'll wake up and it feels like Groundhog Day and it feels like they're unrested, but they'll say, it feels like I had a chase dream. I may not have remembered it, but it feels almost like I was doing something all night long. Right? This very stressful sleep experience, but it wasn't necessarily a night terror or a nightmare, but they'll just be like, man, felt like I ran a race for 7 hours straight. And they're exhausted from their sleep.
No, yeah. And we've been dealing with some stressors in our family life, and I think it's definitely taking a toll on my wife's. She's having horrible nightmares because of what's going on with our baby's health right now. So, I mean, those stressors can definitely play a role. And you just reminded me, another symptom is actually oftentimes when you have sleep apnea or upper airway resistance, you'll wake up and have the sensation of not being able to breathe. That can sometimes happen. That's another potential symptom. You just reminded me.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I think there's probably a bunch of people listening to this probably going, I wonder if I do have sleep issues. I would say if you feel like you have insomnia and you wake up in the middle of the night, can't go back to sleep, and it feels like your sleep is 100% unrestful every time and it doesn't feel good, there's something going on there. There's something going on there and it warrants examination. Because, one of the studies I read was that sleep apnea shortened your life more than smoking. And that was an earlier study, but yes, statistically. Yeah, you might as well light up a Marlboro, or you can get your, you just let your sleep problem continue.
I definitely believe it. And the other reason why it might have there's something called REM-based obstructive sleep apnea. I'm messing up the exact phrase, but sometimes this happens more in REM sleep for some people, which could be a reason why you're having those mid sleep halfway through the night. You're having the awakening because you're usually getting more REM during the second half of the night. So that's another possible explanation for what your patients are experiencing.
Yeah, you know what? You're exactly right. So I always wondered why this shows up in women in perimenopause. So perimenopausal sleep disruption always hits about 3 a.m. I call it the witching hour. And usually somewhere between 1 and 3, which is when you generally would rotate into those REM sleep. There's two things that happen as we get into perimenopause that contribute. Progesterone decrease, and progesterone actually affects the tone of the windpipe, your pipe, in your throat, right? So we get more compression in the airway, in the throat, as we lose progesterone. And we lose the receptor activity in the brain for GABA, which helps us stay asleep also. So you've got like these two things that are happening from a hormonal standpoint that can contribute. And then as a woman, we've got the airway issue that's already there because we're petite and we're not built the same. But I think that's a really underappreciated part of what's happening. I know for me, it seems like I could fall asleep fine and I could make it through the first part of the night. My deep sleep was terrible. You know, I was like 8 minutes. But my REM sleep, yeah, I remember the first time I had a sleep study, and it was, you know, at this point 14 years ago, because I was like, something's really wrong. And I get it back, and I don't have any hypoapnea events, but I have like 32 arousals an hour, and I literally have like 2 minutes of REM sleep. Like, you're fine. I'm like, what? There's no way.
Yeah, the cortical arousal thing is, that's a whole nother metric that they don't have much. It's not clinically used, but it's definitely relevant, you know?
Totally. So I think for a lot of women, this is what they get. They'll fall asleep sitting up somewhere at 8:30 at night. But man, you get to 2 a.m., it's over. And then they fall back asleep at 5:30 because they're exhausted. But I think you're absolutely right.
And that's another sign. If you fall asleep really fast, that's another sign. I mean, it should actually take like 5 to 10 minutes if you're not, because it shows your body is very sleep deprived.
Yeah. Well, and even looking at like the largest cause of accidents outside of drunk driving is sleep deprived, right? Like if you fall asleep at a stoplight, you got major problems here.
I've studied this stuff. I mean, like 3 Mile Island, like Chernobyl. There's almost always a sleep factor to these major world accidents, actually. Another reason, one estimate is it costs around $411 billion how sleep plays a role in accidents every year. So definitely, it's a thing. It's a big deal.
It is a thing. All right. So I want to talk about technology because technology can absolutely, like playing with our phones, scrolling on Instagram, TikTok until 10 o'clock at night. All of those things can absolutely make our sleep really crappy. But you studied a lot of very important things that we would use technology for to improve sleep quality, like sound and light and those kind of things. So I think it's this dual-edged sword, right? Sometimes it can help, sometimes it can harm. It's all about the application of it. So talk to me about technology, the good, the bad, and especially the things that you have created, because I think they're very helpful.
Yeah, so, I mean, and you really hit the nail on the head. It's this double-edged sword here. And I think we're in this mess essentially because of technology, yet technology is also, ironically, the only way to get us out of this mess. So since the 1950s, Americans on average are sleeping an entire hour less than they did, that they're currently sleeping an entire hour less than they did in the 1950s based on a Gallup poll that tracked Americans over like 70 years. So we are sleeping less than we ever have before, essentially. And the main reason for that is likely electricity becoming like commonplace in like the 20s, essentially. We can now work and play at any time. It made us more detached from nature and the rhythms that our bodies require to function optimally. You know, going to bed and waking up at a similar time every day is one of the main factors that's predictive of longevity and healthy sleep patterns. So the light bulb essentially allowed us to do this, and then we've progressed from the light bulb to TV to the phones. I think it went into an exponential kind of impact with the phones now. And the blue light from the phones gives our eyes, the photoreceptors in our eyes, this signal to a part of our brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It gives you basically this wrong signal that suppresses melatonin at night, the blue light does, when you should be getting melatonin at night. So you're basically getting this misaligned Zeitgeber, which is the nerdy sleep scientist way of saying your environmental cues are messing with your biological cues, and that's why you're not sleeping well. So that's the picture of how technology has hurt us. But I know, I'm 100% confident, and I have some data to show, that we can use sound, light, and temperature to optimize every human's sleep every single night. And I've ran a randomized controlled trial showing that playing sounds in a structured way, what I call a sleep journey throughout the night, augmented with red light at night and a sort of a happy light in the morning, can help with sleep. And I'm currently working with a temperature regulating company called Perfectly Snug, and there's it basically shoots air through either side of the bed, so you can get cold. So people run in different temperatures and stuff like this. But actually, reducing your internal body temperature can help you fall asleep. That's another hack. Basically, blocking out noise pollution, dark, quiet, cool. Those are things that are going to help you with your sleep. And we also play these sounds that sort of lull you into sleep, block out noises. We actually dynamically adjust sounds based on your sleep state. My technology is called Sleep Space. You can try it for free. And then, wakes you up with like a bird sound or like in a lighter stage of sleep. So those are some of the solutions that I've been playing with. The other one that you sort of alluded to in a way that I wasn't even aware of is a really safe supplement. And so I told you about, I've been using this thing, MD Bio Wellness, which is a supplement that mainly functions on GABA. I wasn't actually aware of what you just mentioned, this relationship. So GABA, as your listeners might not be aware, is the most common inhibitory neurotransmitter in the body. I wasn't aware, and actually I have a question for you about it, this relationship between GABA and the airway. So I work with them mainly combining GABA with my cognitive behavioral therapy based solution, which is the recommended treatment for insomnia. Actually the recommended is to see a therapist, but I have a digital version that's based on it, which is addressing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that form around getting a poor night of sleep. But I think there's something to combining the behavior stuff with a safe and effective supplement like the MD Bio thing that mainly functions on GABA, L-theanine, and stuff like this. So can you answer that? Sorry to flip around this.
This is great.
Tell me more about the. I didn't know about this airway and GABA thing.
So as a woman goes through perimenopause, the hormone that declines first is progesterone. That's why we start to see fertility issues even in some women in their late 30s, because progesterone's job is to counterbalance estrogen and sort of prepare the uterine lining for implantation. But when we hit our 40s, we start a pretty quick decline of progesterone because we don't have as many eggs in the crate anymore. And progesterone in itself is relaxing, right? It's calming. It helps kind of balance out the sort of stimulatory effects that estrogen can have. One of the mechanisms it does that is, particularly in the brain, it potentiates the receptor for GABA. So for everybody, that it kind of holds the keyhole open. So the GABA key, which is your body's natural Xanax, clicks it in and allows your body to turn on that sort of calming effect, which is part of what keeps us asleep. Melatonin signals to go to bed and fall asleep, and then GABA helps keep us asleep, along with a little bit of serotonin too. But the two work in tandem. So most women start to see pretty significant sleep problems in their 40s and then onward. And then when their temperature stuff kicks in, like, estrogen starts to go wonky, and I like to call it the ketchup bottle effect. One day it's really low, the next day it's really high because your ketchup bottle's half empty and you're shaking it, squeezing it, and then it splats everywhere. That we start to get massive changes to our control, our thermostat in the body. And so then we start having night sweats and hot flashes, and we sleep hotter. And then you kind of add those two together, and sleep is one of the biggest menopausal problems. And it really is that you sort of relaxation, temperature control, the hormones really going nowhere, right? We basically go into ovarian failure. So if a woman's getting support, like with the product, the MD Bio, or, products that contain herbs and things that support GABA, if it's still not working a lot, that may be a case for a bioidentical progesterone replacement. And particularly oral micronized is fabulous for sleep. It's been studied in women, both perimenopausal and menopausal, and huge support. So, yeah.
Thank you. You were really pulling this all together for me. I'm learning. I just learned like a whole nother dimension to this process, and it actually validates why, like, that I'm on this path. So you're giving me more ammunition to support why I'm on this path. So thank you.
And like I said, it seems to, now there's only been a few studies that kind of examined this, but it also seems to have a regulatory effect, progesterone does, on the basically tone of the musculature around the airway in the soft palate and throat, right? And that may also contribute. So all of those things are why women experience so many sleep problems. But I want to go back to temperature because I think this is super important. I use a competing product, and I'll tell you, I am somebody that's always cold. It is right now August. I'm in my house. I've got basically a hoodie on. I'm cold. My husband's going to tell you it's hot in here. I'm freezing all the time, right? But when I lay down to go to sleep, I might be cold in the beginning, but I will get warm in the middle of the night, and it'll pull me out of sleep. So when I use a sleep adjusting product that keeps my core body temperature cooler, I can stay in sleep. And game changer. And it actually will save you on your air conditioning, because most people will crank their air conditioning to like 65. Yeah. We calculated it was almost $1,200 in a year. Because half of our house was getting air conditioned to as cool as possible to try and keep, because of course my husband's like, he's burning up, to try and keep the temperature balanced so we could stay asleep. But when we added cooling support inside the bed itself, man, it was a game changer.
So there's a couple products out there. I like this one. I like the air aspect of it because it works really quick instead of like a water solution.
I have one that's a water solution.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, a lot of different things works, and it's fun. It's funny, like how it changes. Like, I used to be the one that runs hot, and then after my wife had our baby, now she's the one that runs hot. So this stuff even changes within an individual, which is sort of interesting. And this has been studied for a while. I'll just run, and the dynamics of this are a little bit more complicated, I think, than some people realize. So, maybe one of the first researchers that really investigated temperature and sleep was this guy. He's a professor at, I think he was at University of Pittsburgh, Eric Nafziger. And he made the original cooling technology. I think this was maybe the first one. It was called, it was something that you wore on your head, basically. It was called, I'm going to blank right now on what it was. Oh, Ebb Therapeutics. And so he was noticing that when people had insomnia, their prefrontal cortex literally would heat up because they were thinking so much. And so his thought was, okay, if we cool down that brain, maybe it'll help people fall asleep. And, there's other evidence for why that might be. When we fall asleep, our internal body temperature decreases. So essentially, things that decrease your internal body temperature will help you fall asleep. So, that technology, you can't get it anymore. I think the head form factor is just a little bit too invasive for most people. But there is something to that. There's like real science backing this up. But it's a little more complicated in the sense of, and you sort of alluded to it a little bit, there's the ambient temperature in your bedroom, which, it's recommended to keep it quite cool usually. If you have a topper like we're describing, you can maybe keep it a little warmer. But there's the ambient temperature, which, most people without the chili pad or whatever, we recommend keeping it at pretty cold, like 62 even, or like 65 to like 68 degrees, I'd say. But then there's the temperature under your sheets, which is actually usually quite warm, like, 90-ish degrees, 95-ish degrees. And then the third factor is the relationship between your distal temperature versus your proximal temperature. So it's almost like the differential between the temperature of your limbs versus the temperature of your core. And there's sort of a counterintuitive thing here where reducing your core temperature helps you fall asleep, but actually increasing your distal temperature helps you fall asleep. Because of how temperature flows from your limbs to your core being your head and your torso, essentially. So that's why there's some funny studies where wearing socks actually helps you fall asleep, because of this flow of temperature, and this whole mechanism that I described is also why, if you're particularly wound up, taking a warm bath can help, in addition for it being relaxing. You're increasing the temperature of your external environment, which reduces your core body temperature, because you're fighting off the increased temperature. And then the other whole thing with this that you were talking about is, in REM sleep we lose thermal regulation. So in REM sleep, which is, you have REM sleep throughout the whole night, but it's more common in the second half of the night. So if you lose thermal regulation and your body's not at the right temperature, you'll hop up awake in a night sweat. So that's why having this technology where you can control the temperature and dissipate temperature within the sheets, I think there's a lot of potential there.
Oh, I agree. I've definitely posted some things on Instagram about all the things that I do for sleep. So I have a cooling blanket. I wear socks. I have the cooling chili pad. In the winter, I have. Yeah. Oh, I'm all over this. I have so much tech in my bedroom. I can't even stay at like a Four Seasons without complaining and bitching about the hotel room, because my tech. Yeah, my tech at home for sleep is so good that I'm like, I need to pack all this crap with me and take it with me, because I don't sleep well otherwise. We have an extraordinary amount of like sleep tech to get high quality sleep in our bedroom.
That being said,
I totally biohack it.
Just for your insomniacs in the audience, and like, you don't need anything else to fall asleep. That's another way of, like, you can do this yourself. So True. Yes, the tech can help, but also keep in mind, like, especially if you're an insomniac, you don't need anything else. You can do this yourself as well. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Yeah, because, you alluded to it. Obviously, there's cognitive behavior therapy, which is, for lack of a better word, talk therapy around sleep and our thought processes and all these other things and how to work through that. Because a lot of people get sleep anxiety about their inability to sleep, and that drives it. Like, everything else is fine.
That's why I'm trying to speak to that thought process.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like, oh my God, no, I still can't sleep. Like, yes, you can. And especially your Sleep Space app is amazing because it helps take you out of your brain. It helps you get into that space of chill out, relax. It's okay. Gives your brain sound waves that help kind of put it into that right brainwave state to relax and go to sleep. Like, you can do that. I just happen to be a biohacker and I have all these tools.
Right. And that's the interesting thing. Like, what I would say to a biohacker is almost sometimes opposite of what I say to the insomniac. So part of this is knowing who you are and where you're at and doing like the thing that's like right for you in this moment.
Yeah. Now let's talk about, so obviously you've got your Sleep Space app and that helps people, work through the cognitive behavior therapy. It's got the lights and the sound and everything. But there's also some tech that even I would guess that my biohacking listeners don't know about. Like, they know about the Whoop, the Aura, the Apple Watch. They probably have all of them and compare them every day. But, there's some other devices that are pretty cool that we're starting using in our clinic and that can really give that next step of what's going on, like with airway. I think that's valuable.
Yeah, so I've been working for a number of companies in this space. The key word here is at-home sleep test. So a lot of people, they think of getting tested for their sleep of, oh, I got to go to the sleep lab. They're going to hook me up to electrodes. It's going to be horrible. Nowadays, especially in the last 5 years, you can get fully diagnosed for something like sleep apnea, and you can evaluate your sleep health from the comfort of your home for an extremely affordable price. And if you want, I'll give you a link in the notes for how your listeners can access this.
Yes, that would be great.
One of the main companies that I'm working with right now that does this is a company called Wesper. And you can do it's basically 2 patches that you wear on your stomach in addition to a pulse oximeter that you wear on your finger. So it's not like these electrodes all over your body. I've worn it a couple times, and basically I wore it to get diagnosed for sleep apnea. And then the right thing, I had a mild case in my situation. I was at around an AHI of 10, so that's an apnea-hypopnea index of 10, which would put me as a mild case of sleep apnea. I got my dentist for mild, CPAP is the recommended treatment, but also an effective treatment is something called a mandibular advancement device that a dentist can make, which is proven effective particularly for mild cases like mine. And so I had my dentist make an MAD for me, and this was all happening when I had recently gained around 20 pounds. It's sort of, and I noticed on my aura that my deep sleep was going down, and I was consulting for this company Wesper and trying it out. I had no idea, and I was like, oh, I'm not like, you can see me right now, I'm not like crazy overweight, but I'm a little overweight. And that 20 pounds did it. And so now I got this MAD device from my dentist. I've retested with the Wesper, and Aura and Apple Watch, they'll give you pulse oxygenation, but it's not at a granularity that's meaningful for this measure at all. They can maybe sort of pick it up, but it's quite often where, because these are subtle adjustments in your AHI over a specific period of your blood oxygenation over SpO2 over a specific period of time. The Aura really isn't sensitive enough to read it. Maybe one day it will be, but you really need this device, or there's a couple other of them out there, and you can essentially do it for like $150, $180. Get this evaluation. And then the key here is, after I got the MAD, from a biohacker's perspective, let's see that this actually worked, So I retested using the device, and then my AHI was in the 4 or 5 range. It was like 4.8 or something like this. So that's the right process, and honestly, like, I think 1 in 2 people should go through that process. I think it's a very common issue, and even if you're at 3 to 4 of these apnea-hypopnea index events an hour, I think you could improve to 0. You should be at 0 to 1. You should not be choking every hour throughout the night. So that's my spiel on that side of it.
Yeah, I love the idea of having the Whisper where you can really actually sort of track what's happening over a period of time. It's not just, one day or one night in a sleep study place. Because I can tell you, no woman is going to fall asleep in a sleep studies clinic with a bunch of electrodes stuck to them with somebody kind of creepy on the other side watching. We're just not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It feels
some
creepy.
Hyper-arousal situation there, too.
Yeah. I like it.
And
yeah,
even for
like
a man, I get it how it's more for a woman, but, like, for any human, that's a thing, Yeah. There's also something called the first night effect where usually you sleep worse in a new environment in any situation, just from probably an evolutionary biology perspective. So that's why doing it at your home just makes sense. You're going to get a better measure, and it used to be that you could only use it once. The cool thing about some of these new technologies is they're reusable, so you can use it over multiple instances.
Yeah, which the Whisper is definitely like that. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll put a link to all of that in show notes where you can actually get kind of the whole shebang, the actual app and the Whisper and all of those pieces. Because at the end of the day, knowing what's going on is one thing. Addressing it is obviously the goal. But you got to make sure you're doing the right testing to understand what you're really trying to correct, honestly.
Yeah, and so that's like my thing right now is get the testing, evaluate it, see if there's a problem, and while you're doing that, also do the Sleep Space app and a safe and effective supplement. Combining that all together, I think packaging it all together, that's the ultimate, my current theory on what is the ultimate solution for anyone who wants to improve their sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, which brings me, I want to get your opinion because everybody probably knows what I'm going to say. Why should people not be relying on things like Ambien and Xanax and all these sort of sleep medications, even the nighttime Benadryl PM? But I hopefully my people know this, but give them your take since this is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, and each one of those has their own reasons. I think Benadryl PM has some long-term issues with the heart or something like this if you take it all the time. But as for Ambien and the benzos and the non-benzo benzos, I mean, it really hinders your sleep quality oftentimes. And one of my advisors has a client who he tells the story where he was on Ambien for 30 years having all these cognitive difficulties, and this doctor got him off of Ambien and the cognitive difficulties went away because, yes, you can perceive falling asleep faster, but it's hindering your sleep quality. It's almost in a way similar to how alcohol works. Like, you perceive that you fell asleep fast, and some people often use alcohol to fall asleep, but it's wrecking your sleep quality. And so maybe there's a time and a place to bring you down a little bit if you're almost maybe, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical doctor, just have to emphasize that, but see your doctor about all this, but maybe if you're in a hyper-aroused state, there's an appropriate time to take something like Ambien to sort of bring you down, like in a mania or something like this. But most of the studies don't want you to say that it's not really meant to be used. Even similarly, melatonin, for that matter, every single night. So that's why I want to, and also for the elderly, it causes falls, which is a whole nother thing because it's really knocking you out. So that's why I'm after finding an alternative that's effective, that doesn't have all, and it's also highly addictive, that doesn't have all these negative side effects.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Ambien basically anesthetizes you to some degree, and you've got Ambien blackout. I don't know if you know this, Daniel, but this is another one of those kind of interesting facts that are stuck in my brain. But it's the only drug that has a sex-specific starting dose.
Huh.
Yeah, women's
Why?
dose is half of a man's. It was because of a class action lawsuit. A woman hallucinated while on Ambien because the dose was way too high, killed her spouse. And went to court. I mean, again, because people do all kinds of crazy things. They go drive their car, they shop, they go, climb in a neighbor's window, all kinds of crazy things because they aren't actually asleep, but they aren't awake either. But it has a sex-specific dosing because women metabolize it differently. And again, I think maybe, obviously as a PhD, not an MDDO, the reality is it might be necessary if somebody's got a lot of like psychological stress and they just need to get calm down, great. But it was never intended to use for 20 years of your life.
Exactly.
Ever. And all of them have associations with some with cardiovascular disease risk, hypertension, those kind of things, but definitely cognitive decline because they do mess with your sleep architecture.
Oh yeah, I should have mentioned that. That's a huge factor. Yeah. It really
it's
messes
definitely a
with
huge factor.
With dementia and cognitive decline.
For sure. So I want to say, if you had three things, so the listeners here, they're like, okay, my sleep is jacked up. I'm not sure what's causing it. If you were to leave them with like three parting ideas, or here's your top three that you should sort of address, what would you tell them?
I mean, first one is know thyself. Like, are you the biohacker? Are you the problem with breathing? Are you the insomniac? Characterizing which one of those, archetypes, and there's other nuanced ones as well. I'm sort of the archetype right now of a sleep-deprived parent, and that's a whole set of protocols that's different. I can't control when I'm awake or not so much because my baby. It's almost like sleep training my baby is the way to improve my sleep right now. So know thyself, number one. Use technology, but use it in the good way, not the scrolling through Instagram late at night. And harnessing sound, light, and temperature is, I think, key for that. And then if you really want to knock it out of the park, I would say augment that with some kind of safe and effective supplementation. But first and foremost, rule out any underlying issue like sleep apnea.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think I would add to that is you said it earlier, and I think it's important, is not everybody's a biohacker, and a lot of times it's very simple things. It's using sleep space and getting the right sound and environment that can do a lot for your sleep. You don't have to go spend $10,000 on tools for the bedroom.
Exactly. Yeah. And just like these simple sounds and meditations can have a big effect.
Definitely. Well, Dr. Dan, I'm going to definitely put links in the podcast notes so everybody can get to the sleep space and information about the Wesper and all of that. But how can people find you if they want to look you up online and they're like, wow, this is pretty cool, I want to know more?
Yeah, so I have a TED Talk that's gotten quite a bit of views. If you just Google my name, that'll pop up. And also on Sleep Space, there's a way to contact me through that. And I'm actually very responsive to people that want to reach out to me. If you download my app, there's a little chat functionality, and you can actually speak with me through there.
That's really, really cool. And we'll make sure all of that's in the show notes. So, Dr. Dan, I'm so happy to have had you on here. I hope everybody that was listening learned a ton today and feels like this was one of their best, 48 to 50 minutes they've spent this week.
I hope so. I hope we can help you sleep in a good way, not putting you to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Those are two totally different things. Well,
Right.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Dan, for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. And thank you for listening to Menopause Mastery. And if you love this show and you haven't subscribed yet, click the little button up on the podcast, whatever podcast platform you're listening to, and pick the subscribe. That really actually helps us get more listeners. And, we want to make sure that you don't miss any wisdom each week. All right. and I'll see you next week.